had spent 12 cycles working in the Great Archive of the Galactic Concordance. In that time, she had cataloged millions of documents. She had read assessment reports on 300 species. She had organized trade agreements, diplomatic records, and scientific surveys from across the known galaxy. She thought she had seen everything the archive had to offer. She was wrong. The data cache appeared during a routine inventory of per-contact species assessments. It was buried in a forgotten corner of the archive's oldest storage banks, hidden behind layers of administrative files that no one had touched in centuries. Almost missed it entirely. The cache was marked with a classification tier she had never encountered before. Not restricted, not classified, not even top secret. This was something else, something higher. She should have reported it immediately. Protocol demanded that any unknown classification be referred to a superior, but was curious. She had always been curious. It was what made her a good archivist and what got her in trouble more often than she liked to admit. Her fingers moved across the interface before she could stop herself. The encryption was old but strong. It took her several hours to break through even a small section of it. When she finally managed to decrypt a fragment of the files, she found herself staring at an intelligence report dated 3,000 standard years ago. The report concerned Earth, the humans. That surprised her. Humanity was a relatively unremarkable species in the galactic community. They had joined the Concordance 2 centuries ago and had integrated smoothly. They were friendly, adaptable, and reasonably intelligent. Good traders, decent diplomats, nothing special. But according to this report, the first Concordance scouts to observe Earth had seen something very different. The language was clinical and precise, as all scout reports were, but the content made blood run cold. The report described individuals capable of single-handedly altering planetary outcomes. It referenced beings who could move objects with their minds. Humans who survived injuries that should have killed them instantly. People who seemed to know what would happen before it happened. There was footage attached to the report, grainy and degraded by time but still clear enough to see. A human male stood in the ruins of a collapsed structure. Survivors were trapped beneath tons of stone and metal. Emergency services had not yet arrived. The man walked to the wreckage, planted his feet, and lifted. He lifted 17 tons of stone with his bare hands. He held it there while the survivors crawled free. Then he set it down and walked away before anyone could question him. The scouts who recorded this footage had made a recommendation at the end of their report. It was written in bold letters, underlined 3 times for emphasis. They recommended immediate and permanent quarantine of the Sol system. They recommended that no contact ever be made with humanity. They recommended that all records of their observations be sealed and that Earth be classified as a Category 0 threat. But that recommendation had been overruled. Someone had decided to ignore it. Someone had allowed humanity to develop and eventually to join the galactic community. And then someone had buried all evidence that this report ever existed. Sat in the dim light of her workstation trying to process what she had found. Her hands were shaking. She scrolled through the cache, looking for more information. Most of the files were still encrypted beyond her ability to break, but she caught glimpses of other file names as she searched. One name stood out among the others. It was labeled simply, the Achilles Contingency. She did not know what it meant. She was not sure she wanted to know, but she knew she could not keep this discovery to herself. The implications were too significant. The potential danger was too great. She had to tell someone. She went a magistrate the next morning. He was her direct supervisor, a veteran archivist who had served the Concordance for over 50 cycles. She trusted him as much as she trusted anyone in the archive. She showed him the fragment she had decrypted and explained how she had found the cache. She expected him to be curious, perhaps concerned, maybe even excited by the historical significance of the find. Instead, the color drained from his face. His skin went pale, a sure sign of fear in his species. He stared at the report for a long moment without speaking. Then he looked up at her with an expression she had never seen before. "You should not have accessed this," he said quietly. "You should not have seen any of this." Before she could respond, he confiscated her access credentials. He placed her under administrative confinement. He told her to speak to no one about what she had found, and then he left without another word. Spent the rest of the day in her quarters trying to understand what was happening. She had broken protocol by accessing the files, but the punishment seemed extreme. Had been afraid, genuinely afraid, not angry or disappointed, but terrified. What kind of secret could fright a 50-cycle veteran of the archive? The answer came that evening in the form of an unexpected visitor. The door chime sounded shortly after dark. Was not expecting anyone. She had no friends close enough to visit, and her family lived on the other side of the station. When she opened the door, she found a human standing in the corridor. He was tall by human standards, with hair and a face lined by age. He wore the formal attire of a Concordance diplomat, but something about him felt different from the humans she had met before. There was a weight to his presence, an intensity in his eyes that made her take an involuntary step backward. He said, his voice was calm and measured. "My name is, I am a cultural with the human delegation. May I come in?" She should have said no. She was under confinement. She was not supposed to speak to anyone, but something in his manner made her hesitate. He did not seem threatening. If anything, he seemed concerned. "How do you know my name?" she asked. "I know what you found today," he replied. "I know what you saw in those files, and I know you have questions that your supervisors will never answer." He paused, meeting her eyes directly. "I can answer them if you are willing to listen." Stood in the doorway for a long moment, weighing her options. She thought about the footage she had watched. The man lifting 17 tons of stone, the recommendation for quarantine, the fear in his eyes. Then she stepped aside and let the human enter. Settled into a chair across from her. He did not speak immediately. He seemed to be gathering his thoughts, choosing his words with care. "What you found," he finally said, "was buried for a reason, a very good reason. The survival of my species depended on it." "I do not understand," said. "The report recommended quarantine. It said humanity was dangerous. But your species was allowed to develop anyway. You joined the Concordance. Why would anyone ignore such a warning?" Smiled, but there was no humor in it. Because someone understood something that the scouts did not. They saw our legends and assumed we were all like that. They thought every human could lift mountains and see the future. He shook his head. They were wrong. Most of us are exactly what we appear to be, ordinary, unremarkable. Most of you. The human leaned forward. His eyes were very serious now. The scouts were not wrong about what they saw. Those abilities exist. They have always existed among us. But they are rare, incredibly rare, and they have always been hidden. Felt her heart's beating faster. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you already know too much to unknow it," replied. "And because the cache you found has not gone unnoticed. Others have detected the breach. Others who do not have humanity's best interests at heart." He stood, moving toward the door. "If you want to understand why those files were classified, I can show you. But you will need to come with me now, before your supervisors realize what is happening." Hesitated. This was madness. She was an archivist, not an adventurer. She had a career to think about, responsibilities to consider. But she thought again of the footage. The man and the stone, the fear in his eyes, the file labeled Achilles' contingency. She had spent her whole life cataloging other people's discoveries. Perhaps it was time to make one of her own. "Where are we going?" she asked. Smiled, this time there was warmth in it. "To meet some legends," he said. Part 2. The Weight of Mythology. The journey to Earth's moon took 3 days. Spent most of that time in a private cabin aboard a human diplomatic vessel, trying to understand what she had gotten herself into. Visited her each evening to answer her questions, but his answers only raised more questions. On the second night, she asked him directly, "Are you one of them, one of these legends you keep mentioning?" Considered the question for a long moment. "I carry the markers," he finally said. "The genetic potential exists in me, but it has never manifested. I am what you might call dormant." He smiled slightly. "Perhaps I will wake one day, perhaps not. Most of us never do." How many humans carry these markers? About 4% of our population, maybe a little more. The genetic screening has become quite precise over the centuries. Did the math in her head. 4% of 12 billion humans. Nearly 500 million people walking around with the potential to become something beyond ordinary. The thought was staggering. And how many have actually manifested these abilities? Throughout all of human history, perhaps a few thousand, maybe less. The expressions are incredibly rare, 1 in 100 million births on average, sometimes more in certain generations, sometimes less. What happens to those who do manifest? Looked away. That is what I am taking you to see. They arrived at the lunar facility on the morning of the third day. The complex was located on the far side of the moon, hidden from direct observation from Earth. Officially, it did not exist. It appeared on no charts, no registries, no government records. Even the concordance had no knowledge of its presence. Inside, found herself in an archive that made the great archive of the concordance look small by comparison. The facility stretched deep into the lunar rock, chamber after chamber filled with preserved records spanning the entirety of human history. Led her through the corridors, stopping occasionally to show her specific exhibits. Here were clay tablets from ancient Mesopotamia, describing a king named Gilgamesh who had fought monsters and sought immortality. There were scrolls from Greece, chronicling the labors of a hero called Heracles who had performed feats no ordinary man could accomplish. Medieval manuscripts detailed the lives of saints who healed the sick with a touch and survived tortures that should have killed them. These were not myths, said as they walked. They were not exaggerations or religious fantasies. They were attempts by ordinary people to document what they had witnessed. The beings they described were real. The feats they recorded actually happened. But how, asked, how is this possible? What could cause such abilities to manifest? We still do not fully understand it. Our geneticists have spent centuries studying the markers, trying to identify the mechanism. The best theory we have is that humanity carries dormant potential from some earlier stage of our evolution, or perhaps from something else entirely. Something that influenced our development long before we have records. He shrugged. The truth is, we do not know. We only know that it is real. They entered a larger chamber filled with more recent materials, photographs and film reels, audio recordings and digital files. The 20th and 21st centuries of human history documented in exhaustive detail. The expressions take different forms, explained. Enhanced strength is the most common, but there have been others, individuals who could heal from any wound, people who could perceive events before they happened, a few who could generate fire or electricity from their own bodies. He paused before a wall of photographs. Each manifestation is unique to the individual. No two have ever been exactly alike. Studied the photographs. Men and women from different eras, different cultures, different walks of life. Some wore the clothing of soldiers. Others appeared to be farmers or scholars or ordinary citizens. There was nothing special about their appearances, nothing to mark them as different from any other human. What happened to them? She asked. His expression grew somber. Throughout most of our history they were feared, hunted, killed. Humanity has never known what to do with those who are different. We made them into gods and demons. We built religions around them and burned them at stakes. He moved to another section of the archive. But eventually we learned. We learned that these individuals were still human, still mortal, still capable of being hurt and killed if enough force was applied, and we learned to hide them. He showed her records from the early atomic age, secret programs run by various governments, all dedicated to the same purpose: identifying carriers before manifestation occurred, monitoring those who showed potential, containing and controlling those whose abilities emerged. When we developed, continued, everything changed. Suddenly, we were not alone in the universe. There were other species out there, other civilizations, and we had to make a choice. A choice. If the galaxy learned what we were capable of producing, what do you think would have happened? Turned to face her directly. Some species would have feared us. They would have demanded our extermination before we could become a threat. Others would have coveted us. They would have tried to enslave us, to breed us like weapons. Either way, humanity would have been destroyed or subjugated. Our existence as a free species would have ended. Understood. So you buried everything. You hid the evidence of what you could do. We did more than that. We rewrote our own history. We turned our legends into myths. We made our heroes into fictional characters. We taught our own people to believe that the stories were just stories, gestured at the archive around them. All of this was hidden. The genetic screening was conducted in secret. Those who manifested were quietly managed. And humanity presented itself to the galaxy as exactly what we appeared to be: ordinary, unremarkable, safe. But the Concordance scouts saw the truth. They recorded that footage. Yes, that was an accident. A manifestation occurred during their observation period. A man they later called the Stone Saint saved his village from an earthquake. The scouts recorded it and sent their recommendation for quarantine. Paused. But someone in the Concordance intervened. A high-ranking official overruled the recommendation and ordered the records sealed. That official allowed humanity to continue developing. They protected us. Who? We do not know. They covered their tracks well. All we know is that they were assassinated shortly after making their decision. Someone did not want humanity protected, but by then the records were already buried. The damage was done, smiled grimly. Someone has been protecting that secret for 3,000 years, keeping the files sealed, making sure no one ever found what you found. Felt the weight of the revelation pressing down on her. 3,000 years of hidden history, of careful deception, an entire species pretending to be less than they were. Why tell me this now? She asked. Why bring me here? I am nobody, a junior archivist. I have no power to help you or harm you. Because you broke the seal, said quietly. When you accessed those files, you triggered alerts that we had not anticipated. The breach was detected not just by us, but by others. Others who have been searching for this information for a very long time. A cold feeling settled in stomach. What others? The hegemony. They have suspected for centuries that humanity was hiding something. They have agents throughout the Concordance looking for evidence. When you access that cache, one of their agents detected the decryption attempt, moved toward a communication terminal. They now have a copy of the files you found, and they are preparing to act on them. What are they going to do? Activated the terminal. A galactic news feed appeared, showing footage of warships mobilizing in their home system. They are going to expose us, he said. They are going to reveal everything we have hidden, and then they are going to demand our containment. Watched the warships assembling. Her heart sank as she realized the scale of what was happening. What will humanity do? Turned off the display. His expression was unreadable. That depends on what the hegemony does next. If they simply release the information, we can deny it, claim the files are forgeries, cast doubt on the evidence. He paused. But if they decide to act first and justify later, if they send ships to Earth before the Concordance can respond. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Then the legends will have to stop hiding, said quietly. Nodded slowly. For the first time in 3,000 years, humanity may have to show the galaxy what we really are. He looked at her with something like sadness in his eyes, and I am not sure any of us are ready for that. Not them. Not us. Not anyone. The alarms began to sound before either of them could speak again. Looked at the communication terminal as it flickered back to life automatically. Emergency broadcasts were flooding in from across the system. The hegemony had made their move. Their fleet was already in transit to Earth. The secret that had been kept for 3 was about to be broken wide open. Part 3, Legends Wake. The hegemony announced their findings to the Galactic Congress in a broadcast that reached every inhabited system simultaneously. Their speaker, a military commander named, presented the evidence with cold precision. The footage of the Stone Saint, the intelligence reports from the original scouts, the recommendation for quarantine that had been inexplicably overruled. Humanity has deceived us all, declared. For 3,000 years they have hidden their true nature. They have walked among us pretending to be ordinary while harboring the potential for destruction on a scale we cannot comprehend. They are not our friends. They are not our allies. They are a threat to every species in this galaxy. The reaction was immediate and severe. Panic spread through the galactic community like wildfire. Several species began withdrawing their ambassadors from Earth. Trade agreements were suspended. Travel restrictions were imposed. In the space of a few hours, humanity went from trusted members of the Concordance to pariahs. Watched the chaos unfold from the lunar facility, feeling sick with guilt. She had done this. Her curiosity, her inability to leave the files alone, had set this catastrophe in motion. Stood beside her, his face grim. It was going to happen eventually, he said, as if reading her thoughts. The hegemony has been looking for this evidence for centuries. If you had not found it, someone else would have. The seal was already weakening. That does not make me feel better. It was not meant to, but it is the truth. He turned to face her. What matters now is what happens next. The hegemony is not satisfied with simply exposing us. They want more. The communication terminal chimed with an incoming alert. Read the message and felt her blood run cold. The strike fleet had entered the Sol system. 40 warships were moving toward Earth at maximum speed. They had announced their intention to establish a protective quarantine around the planet until the Concordance could determine the appropriate response to humanity's deception. But everyone knew what protective quarantine meant coming from the hegemony. It meant occupation, control, the end of human independence. They expected terror, said quietly. They expected us to panic, to negotiate, to surrender. He watched the tactical display showing the approaching fleet. They have made a catastrophic miscalculation. What do you mean? They think they know what we are capable of. They think those ancient reports told them everything. Smiled, and there was something fierce in it. But those scouts only saw one manifestation, one individual, one small fraction of what humanity can produce. They have no idea what they are about to face. The first response came from Lagos. A 93-year-old woman named walked out of a hospital where she had spent the last 6 decades pretending to be dying of old age. She had been one of the first to manifest in the modern era. Her abilities had emerged during a famine in her youth, when she had somehow kept her entire village fed by willing crops to grow in barren soil. The authorities had found her and convinced her to hide. She had been hiding ever since. Now she stepped into the open air, looked up at the sky and rose. She did not use a ship or a vehicle of any kind. She simply flew, straight up through the atmosphere, past the satellites and stations, into the void of space itself. She needed no suit, no protection, no air. She simply existed where no human should have been able to exist. The fleet detected her immediately, a single life sign approaching at impossible speed. No vessel, no propulsion signature, just a being moving through space as easily as others moved through water. Commander ordered his ships to open fire. The weapons of 40 warships focused on a single target, enough firepower to destroy a moon, enough energy to crack a planet's crust. The beams passed through without touching her. She did not dodge or deflect. The weapons simply had no effect. It was as if she existed in a different reality, one where their attacks could not reach. Then she spoke. Her voice carried across every communication frequency in the system. Every ship, every station, every device capable of receiving a signal heard her words. They were calm and measured, but they carried a weight that made even the bravest commanders tremble. "You wanted to know why the legends were classified," she said. "This is why." What she did next was not an attack. She did not destroy a single vessel or take a single life. Instead, she released a pulse of energy that swept through the fleet like a wave. When it passed, every ship in the armada went dark. Weapons systems failed. Navigation computers crashed. Engines sputtered and died. 40 warships, the pride of the hegemony, reduced to helpless hulks drifting in orbit around Earth. Their crews were alive and unharmed, but they were going nowhere. They could only watch as more figures began appearing across human space. They came from everywhere. From cities and villages, from hospitals and retirement homes, from places where they had hidden for decades. The descendants of legends, stepping out of the shadows for the first time in generations. A man in Beijing who could move objects with his thoughts. A woman in Mumbai who could see the future with perfect clarity. A teenager who generated electricity from her own body. Dozens of them, scattered across the planet, each one unique, each one impossible by any standard the galaxy had ever known. They did not attack. They did not threaten. They simply stood in the open, visible to all, a living testament to what humanity had been hiding for 3,000 years. The Galactic Congress convened an emergency session. Representatives from every major species demanded explanations. The hegemony called for immediate action against humanity. Other factions argued for caution, afraid of provoking beings they did not understand. Through it all, humanity's ambassador remained silent. She was a woman named, a career diplomat who had spent her entire life representing her species to the galaxy. She had known about the legends, of course. All senior officials did, but she had never expected to see them revealed like this. When the Congress finally demanded a response, stood and addressed the assembly. "What you have witnessed today," she said, "is not new. These abilities have existed among us for as long as we have been human. They are part of who we are, part of what we are." "Then you admit your deception," shouted from his delegation seats. "You admit that humanity has been lying to us." "We admit nothing except the truth," replied calmly. "Yes, we hid what we could do. Can you blame us? The hegemony's own reaction proves why we had to hide. You did not come to Earth seeking dialogue or understanding. You came with warships. You came to conquer and control. Because you are dangerous. So is every species in this chamber." Looked around the assembly, meeting the eyes of representatives from dozens of worlds. Every civilization represented here has weapons capable of destroying planets. Every one of you has the power to cause harm on a massive scale. But you are trusted because you have chosen not to use that power. You have chosen peace over war, cooperation over conflict. She paused, letting her words sink in. Humanity has made the same choice. For 3,000 years, we have had the power to dominate this galaxy. We could have conquered you all before you ever knew we existed. But we did not. We chose to hide our abilities instead of using them. We chose to live among you as equals instead of ruling over you as masters. "How do we know you will continue to make that choice?" another delegate asked. The question was not hostile, merely uncertain. "You do not," admitted. "But that is the nature of trust between peoples. You cannot know with certainty that any species will remain peaceful. You can only look at their actions and judge accordingly." She gestured toward the display showing Earth's orbit. "Today, 40 warships attacked They fired on one of our people with weapons meant to destroy moons. And what did she do in response? She disabled their ships without taking a single life. She showed mercy to those who showed her none." The assembly fell silent. The point was undeniable. They had attacked first. They had tried to kill a being who had posed no threat to them, and that being had responded with restraint that bordered on kindness. "We will no longer apologize for what we are," continued. "The classification is lifted. The legends are now history. Our children will learn the truth about their ancestors. The galaxy will learn the truth about humanity. She straightened, her voice firm. But nothing else will change. We will not seek dominion. We will not threaten or coerce. We will continue to be exactly what we have always been, members of this community working alongside you toward common goals. And if we demand more assurances? Asked. His voice had lost some of its earlier aggression. Even he seemed shaken by what had happened. Then we will discuss them, negotiate them, find compromises that satisfy everyone, smiled slightly. That is what civilized peoples do. That is what we have always done. The emergency session continued for several more hours. There were arguments and accusations, demands and counterdemands. But gradually, the mood shifted. Fear gave way to curiosity. Hostility gave way to cautious interest. By the time the session ended, no resolutions had been passed against humanity. The fleet was released and sent home in disgrace. And for the first time in galactic history, the existence of human legends was openly acknowledged. Watched the proceedings from the lunar facility, surrounded by the archives that had started everything. Stood beside her, silent and thoughtful. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we learn to live with the truth," replied. "All of us, humans and everyone else." He looked at her. "It will not be easy. There will be fear and suspicion for generations. Some species may never trust us again, but at least we will not be lying anymore. At least we will be facing the future honestly." Thought about the archive around them. Thousands of years of hidden history, legends and myths that had turned out to be real. A secret kept for three, finally exposed. "Do you think it was worth it?" she asked, "hiding all this for so long?" Considered the question. "We survived," he said finally. "We made it to this point without being destroyed or enslaved. We had time to grow, to develop, to become strong enough to face the galaxy as equals." He shrugged. "Whether that was worth the cost, I suppose that depends on what we do now." A message arrived on the communication terminal. It was from the Concordance archive, addressed to directly. Her administrative confinement had been lifted. She was being offered a new position, head of a newly created department dedicated to integrating human historical records into the galactic archives. "It seems you have been promoted," said with a smile. Read the message again, hardly believing it. "They want me to document the truth, the real history of humanity." "Someone has to, and you already know more than most." Extended his hand in the human gesture of farewell. "It was an honor to meet you. You stumbled into something much larger than yourself, and you handled it with more courage than most would have." She took his hand, still marveling at how warm humans were. "I just wanted to understand," she said. "That is all I ever wanted." "And now you do. Now everyone does." He released her hand and turned toward the door. "The legends are awake. The galaxy will never be the same, but perhaps that is not such a bad thing." He left her alone in the archive, surrounded by the weight of human history. Outside, somewhere in the void between worlds, beings of impossible power were revealing themselves for the first time. The galaxy was watching. The galaxy was learning. And humanity, at last, was done pretending to be less than they were. Turned back to the archives and began to work. There was so much to document, so much to preserve, so much to share with a galaxy that had finally learned the truth. The legends were classified for a reason. That reason no longer mattered. What mattered now was what came next. The end.